It's going. Oh, welcome to Ministry Mondays with Meg. I'm Meg. I am Meg Biddle. I'm from, where am I from? I'm from the American Baptist Home Mission Societies, and I am your host, and I'm so glad to have you all here. What is Ministry Mondays with Meg? Well, thank you for asking. It is a show where we talk about ministries that are beyond this pastor in the pulpit in the church, because ministry is so much more, and it's messy and it's beautiful and it's in so many different things that we do in our lives. So welcome. If this is your first time, we absolutely welcome you, but where have you been? um, we are glad you're here though. And if you need to catch up on episodes, they're like all over the place. Just Google Ministry Mondays, but you got to put the with Meg, because there are other people that try to do a Ministry Mondays. Anyway, um, without further ado, I keep saying I need like drum rolls or a trumpet or a confetti machine. I don't think they'd let me have one of those, but anyway, our guest today, folks, is Dr. Eric Sias. Welcome.
Thank
Welcome
you.
to,
Thank you.
welcome to the show. So
Thank
glad
you
to
for
have
having me.
you. Yeah. Way out there in what must be beautiful California. Is it?
It is indeed beautiful
Mm,
California. Yeah, Bay Area, California.
mm. I've only ever been to California once, and that was a few years ago. It was the Menlo Park, is where I was.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Sure, Milo.
it was lovely. A lot of traffic, but it was lovely. Um, so
That's the
for
thing, traffic and
yeah,
prices.
uh, oh yeah, I remember like the gas prices were insane. It was also yeah. Anyway, I could go down that road, but let's tell everybody
Yeah.
why. Okay, so for those who don't know you, Dr. Eric,
Mhm.
why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are, what you do, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Okay, so yeah, Dr. Eric Sias. I am a assistant professor of biblical studies and the director of the Latina and Latino programs at Berkeley School of Theology at Berkeley, California. So we're part of the Graduate Theological Union, the consortium there as well too, up on Holy Hill as they call it, across the UC Berkeley campus. And so we are the of the many centers and seminaries that are part of the GTU. We're the American Baptist affiliated seminary there. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about my work. So, from the biblical studies perspective, um, always had an interest in Leviticus. Actually, since I
Leviticus.
was since I was a child, I had an interest in Leviticus. So I was a child before I could even read. I was actually leafing through my family Bible, looking at the paintings and pictures. I always had that like huge interest in that as a kid, and it was. I don't know if it was so much like a devotion or a sort of a spiritual connection per se. It was more of a fascination. Um, in fact, during my, I grew up Catholic, and in our household on Good Fridays, the traditional day Jesus died, Good Friday. It's that Friday before Easter. We were forbidden from turning on like TVs or radio, or listening to music as a sort of honoring and mourning Jesus's death and waiting for the resurrection, right? But the only movies we were allowed to watch were like the Jesus movies, the greatest story ever told, Jesus of Nazareth, and because my dad would go rent them, and that was like better than Christmas for me. That was like the coolest, best day because I got to sit down all day and watch Jesus movies. And the Ten Commandments as well
I was going to
too.
say
Like
that was
what?
my question. Did you get to watch the Charlton
Oh
Heston? And
sure. Oh, and
okay,
I love it. I love them. It just takes me back to that. Um, But Leviticus was always in there as a kid. It's just this huge fascination. So as I got into my my academic degrees, focused a lot on that. During my master's, though, it took a little bit more of an apocalyptic literature
Mm,
perspective when I was doing my training, because not so much because I wanted to per se. I mean, it was interesting, but it's because more of the professors I was working under, they were focusing or emphasizing that as well. So I got some really good training on apocalyptic literature. By the time though I got to my PhD, I was like, yeah, I love Leviticus, but I want to do something else with it as well too. And I remember speaking with my mother, and she's like, "Well, you've always been in this like really big debate with Paul. You've
mm,
always been because yeah, I had this sort of animosity towards Paul. In fact, of
I get that.
in well, in my understanding of what I thought he did with Judaism and the parting of the ways, as they call it, between Judaism and Christianity. Um, and I thought, well, that's true. So why don't I combine the two, right? And I always had this fascination, particularly with impurities dealing with bodily fluids. I know it's like the weirdest thing in the world. And I thought, well, why
Interesting.
don't I dive into blood? Paul talks about Jesus's blood. I could dive into understanding why is it that Jesus's blood takes away sin, this idea, and so that led me to Romans chapter 3, and in my dissertation then later I was able to um, sort of re-understand, reinterpret how Jesus's blood was understood by Paul, um, through a more of a Leviticus lens or perspective, particularly the purification offering that you see like in Leviticus 4 and 6 and a bunch of places in the in those early chapters. And so I was kind of able to bring those two things into conversation. I don't know if successfully. I mean, my dissertation was approved, let's say that. So at least it convinced somewhat of some
Yeah.
people. And so that's now led me to uh, to begin a book with Fortress
Oh,
Press. They reached out, yeah, and so that's in the process. So that is forthcoming. But it's not just going to be specifying on that particular thing I did in my dissertation. I'm broadening it more to purity in Paul. But part of that work I'm going to do in that book is I think learning about Paul is probably the one of the most important things right now. Not only seminarians, but the church really needs, because in my deep dive of Paul and understanding and reading him and reading all these other scholars that have worked with Paul, it's really not Paul's fault what happened to Paul. It's sort of like what happens with social media. You unleash your tweet or whatever they call it now. I don't, I'm not into social media at all, but you unleash something and it
yeah.
becomes, a creature of its own, an entity of its own that's interpreted and changed up and shaped by different people. And sometimes that author, that individual can, maybe even get a little bit of the blame for what that entity becomes. That's a little bit, I would argue, of what happened to Paul, and so I find diving into Paul and maybe getting at the bare bones of Paul would really be important to the church, because it would really change the church's identity, especially when it comes to how they understand themselves relative to Judaism, um, which I think is something really important because of the supersessionism that has come from Paul, particularly, which is actually kind of ridiculous. I honestly think if Paul would be here today to see what Paul has become, it would definitely be a head in hand like sort of thing. Like, oh,
Right.
this is.
He's like,
Yeah.
this is not what I meant, folks.
Yeah, yeah, and the limited amount of letters. It's like, someone finding 3 or 4 of my emails where I have hundreds, maybe thousands of emails, right? And they go off of those, like, just goodness. And there's some emails I definitely would not want people to be looking at, because of, how ridiculous they were written, or how poorly they were written or whatnot. And so yeah, that's one of the directions my my work has led me to, and
Yeah.
that's where I'm at right now. Yeah,
Well, when that book gets published, when you're finished and it's published, let me know. And even though this will have
definitely.
already aired, we'll still attach it to your episode because it's the internet, so it goes in history.
Mhm.
Or you could come back. We have guests that make multiple appearances. You could come back and promote the book.
And talk about it
Um,
more.
yeah, it doesn't matter that
I'd
it's not.
I'd be happy to.
I
I'd be
love
happy
that.
to.
I love that.
Yeah.
So you'd be my second person who made more than one appearance, and then came back and talked about it was their first published book, and so it was really cool to be a part of Mindy Walton Mitch's as well. So yeah, we'd love to have you
Thank
come
you.
and do that.
Yeah,
We'll
I'd
plug
love
it.
to.
Yeah.
Great, great,
Uh,
great.
so you grew up Catholic.
I grew
How'd
up
you end up?
Catholic.
How'd you end up Baptist?
So I'm actually not affiliated with
Okay,
any,
you're
yeah,
just
with
at the
not,
Baptist school.
yes. So
Okay.
how I ended up there actually is a bit of a history as well too. So when I started, I mean, orientation day, uh, of my PhD program, when I came in from, I was in Jackson, Tennessee before that, teaching at a small HBCU, Lane College. I taught there for a few years, and then when I got into the PhD program, I came out over here to Berkeley, and then during the orientation, uh, Dr. Leanne Flesher, the dean of what was then American Baptist Seminary of the West, now Berkeley School of Theology, she was there and immediately took me under her wing. I mean, immediately. And then from that moment on, I was helping out with the what was called then the Iniciativa Latina, in Spanish, the Latino Initiative, which is a program that we have, which I'm now the director of, that it basically offers a certificate, to the student that is a bachelor's equivalency. And so when they finish with this certificate, they can now apply to our ATS accredited master's program there at BST. And
They can.
so
Oh,
it's a really, and we have a version in English and but in Spanish. I'm the one who directs mainly the Spanish one, the Spanish version, and it's really picked up steam. I mean, it's going, before, it was like, it would fluctuate in the amount of students we had. It went down to one student at one point, a few years back, but now we're at like 30 plus students.
okay.
They're, we're gaining ground with it for sure. We've now had, more than 5 graduate with the certificate, um, and all interested in the master's program. But as it goes, it's financial resources, particularly on the side of the
Yeah.
student, that is the holdup,
Yeah.
with that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So if the best way if somebody were interested in finding out more, is the best way just to start at the Berkeley School of Theology website,
Website,
or yeah.
correct.
Okay.
Yes, and
Okay.
yeah, yeah, we have a link there for the certificate program.
Okay. So I'll make sure that in the show notes that we have that,
Okay.
in case somebody wants to reach out and find out more, because I think, especially given the cost of higher education,
Right.
things like that are so important, because I came out of seminary,
Mhm.
owing over $100,000, and
Oh yes,
you know, they'll be paying that after I'm dead, kind of thing. So,
I hear you. I hear
yeah,
you.
yeah. So I can understand why financial is the biggest, because
Is the biggest issue,
yeah, because nobody wants to put their family into poverty, just so
right?
that they can get their education. And I still feel guilty about that, but whatever. I'm just so glad that they have that. And so
Exactly.
you consider yourself then non-denominational now? Is that where you're at?
But just unaffiliated.
Unaffiliated.
And
Okay.
yeah. So I don't practice any. In fact, so and I just want to make it clear because there might be some ambiguity. I'm not an atheist, not at all, right? And
What?
yeah, and and it's that's probably where I draw the line. Is right there. I usually tell people because they'll ask like, "Do you believe in God?" And I'm like, I wouldn't use that verb, believe. I would say more hope. I hope there's God. Like, and I don't know if there's a difference there between that, theologically or not, but definitely that's the verb I would use is hope, particularly given the state of everything. Um, and I of course do have my views of Jesus as well too, very much. Um, but up until there, I'll say this. Given my since I was a kid, my curiosities and skepticisms, it's just probably a now that I'm just an automatic critical thinker in the sense that I begin to question, okay, where's this view coming from? It's not good for either me, the pastor, or the congregation for me to be sitting at a sermon. Just because I'm there deconstructing, and that's not the point of that. And so I've often found my ministry or calling, if you could call it that, as the one who is there to teach those future leaders, right? Particularly like those important aspects, like I talked about Paul. So I always stress Paul. I always stress supersessionism. I always stress all these things that maybe, just maybe, we can actually begin to um, think of a paradigm shift where there's now more a sense of unity than division, or a sense that the
Mhm.
dichotomies aren't so prominent, right?
Mhm.
Especially with those, it's so strange, because it's not just like within Judaism and Christianity that the people who get along least are people who are the closest, or are the
Mhm.
neighbors, if you will.
Yeah.
I grew up in El Paso, Texas, right? Like, that's where I'm from, and so the border with Mexico is right there, and the huge rivalries between the U.S. and Mexico, when we're right there so close, and we could, the rivalries just make things worse instead of.
Yeah.
And I find that I've always found that really interesting, right? Like that, especially like countries that are neighboring are usually the biggest enemies instead of the closest friends, and that's just.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's something that I really would want to teach within the seminary
Yeah.
um, setting.
That's really interesting. I mean, it reminds you of all that. I think it's family systems that the ones that bother you the most are also the ones that you're the most like.
Uh,
And so you've got to go, so what's going on with me that
uh-huh.
mirrors them? And yeah, all that stuff that you have to unpack. That's that's really, really interesting. And giving people the opportunity to understand Paul, um, I think, yeah, would be a great thing, because I mean, I think about seminary, and it was like second semester of New Testament. You just might as well called it Paul, because
Mhm.
that's what it. But also, you had these feelings about Paul, and um, I think one of the best things that we had to do was um, choose choose books, and the one that I chose was Paul, a novel.
Mm,
Walter Wangerin wrote it, so it's fictional, um, based off, of, and it just gives you a little bit more context and gives you a little bit
mm,
where you could go, oh, okay, I could see that. I mean,
mhm.
where it just, I think it humanizes him,
Sure,
where
sure.
as it seems like often with biblical text that gets lost is
We
that,
read them in a vacuum, right? We don't understand
yeah,
that, the
yeah,
destruction of the temple was happening for Mark, and that's a horrible event, and they were going through. Yeah, so that's certainly a big issue with Paul, and look, it might sound like I'm coming off completely defending him, and not at all. I mean, I have my big issues with Paul, and if I had him, he's one of the people they asked me if there was anybody in history I could sit down and have dinner with. Paul would definitely be one, right? With this,
really,
without a doubt. And but to sit there and I'd probably be interrogating him more than having
yes,
a conversation with him. But that he's definitely a product of his time. And he's often what I say. I tell people, because he was totally the outsider, right? Nobody liked him. It's pretty clear in his letters. It's Galatians, he's annoyed and everything, and that even his congregations or his churches that he started, that congregation, I guess it's not the
yeah,
appropriate word for that time, but his house churches that he started, um, were didn't like him that much as well. And I often think he was probably that guy. We all have that friend in our group, when they show up, that we say, "Oh man, like Paul just showed up, like here he is," and not just because he's annoying, but because he's right, and he's smart, and he knows how to present his position in a way where it's like, what can I say, right? Like, how can I refute this?
yeah,
What, peppered with annoyingness. That's what I find Paul was like. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I could see that. I could see him being that annoying friend that's always,
He shows up to the party and like,
mhm,
oh.
uh-huh. But then the biggest problem is that they're always right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And when you're having that dinner with Paul, and he'd be like, "Okay, so you read that part, but didn't you read
This
the
or
next?"
that.
And you're like, "No, we didn't get that. That totally got lost."
Or it's
Oh,
more like, Paul,
well,
like, just stop. I'm here to talk like friend stuff with you, not that. Just stop, for God's sakes.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, so those things that we have no idea about, and that would be really interesting to
And I,
learn.
I don't know if I'm that friend in my group. Maybe I am. And maybe I'm reading my
Your
own,
own.
well, I'm sure I am, my own experiences into Paul. And maybe thinking subconsciously that I'm that friend in the group. But
Well, no one
definitely,
said
yeah.
that you gotta watch out for Eric because he's one of those people. No one warned me of that, if you were
No,
supposed to
no
come with
one
me.
warned you yet.
No, no, but they did tell me something about you.
Oh, interesting.
Um, uh-huh.
I'm
So,
curious who's the they too.
well, maybe when I tell you what they told me, you'll go,
Okay.
"Oh, I know who told you." You have a lavender farm.
I do have a lavender farm. Well, I manage a lavender farm. I
What
do.
the heck? Really? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
how does one get into managing lavender?
Right. So, okay. So, I live in what's called the East Bay. That's sort of east of San Francisco, the city of San Francisco. And then the farm is in the North Bay, and so that's north of San Francisco. That's where, like, you have the very famous Marin County, like it's north of the Golden Gate Bridge. A really expensive, beautiful, you know. So the farm is in Sonoma County, which is North Bay. So we're surrounded by a lot of vineyards there. It's 9.5 acres of lavender. Um, just one species. It's called Grosso lavender, and so we make products. We distill we extract the oil from the plant,
Mhm.
make products from that, and then we have a lot of visitors that come in from all around the world. And the way I got into it is that when I have a cousin who lives here, who's lived here all her life, and so when I moved out here, I connected with her, a cousin from my father's side, who I'd only met once at a family reunion years before, so we didn't know each other really well at all. And once I got here, I connected with her more, and we became actually very good friends. And she was working for this company, and the owner of the company then retired and started this in his property. And she's like, I'd like to go for you to meet him. And I've always been interested in plants and gardening. That's actually one of my 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 hobbies that I absolutely love. And she's like, you're good with plants. Why don't you go out there and see if you all can connect, and maybe you can start helping out? Well, sure enough, because she's just an expert in making connections like that. I ended up starting off just helping giving tours just for free for him, and showing people around, which then became more of like every week going in giving, or every weekend going in giving tours, and helping out with this or that. And that was what, 5 years ago, and ever since, yeah, I've been there now, and now kind of helping running the place, and it is a sight.
I I I mean, I can only imagine. I've never been to a lavender farm, but wow. Yeah. So, um, I was like, wow, really, a lavender farm? I can. I mean, it must be beautiful when it's
Oh, yes,
blooming.
when it's blooming. So it blooms in late June to late July, this species. So
Okay.
that's when it's purple. But once August comes around, that's when it gets fragrant. So it's either colorful or it's fragrant, not really both. And so we're now hitting fragrance season, and I mean,
Ah.
it's 9.5 acres of just that, right? Of just fragrance. Yeah, and it's quite lovely. Yeah.
So do people like smell you coming during fragrance season? Are they like,
I
oh,
hope in a
must
good way.
be. I mean, I smell lavender. Must be Eric.
It must be Eric coming in.
I mean, I would think being on 9.5 acres of lavender and fragrance, you wash your clothes, you wash your body, but it's still there.
It's
Kind of
still
like
there.
garlic and things.
Yeah, yeah, I can't smell it, but I do know that the whole building there at Berkeley School of Theology has a lavender smell, because I'll take bouquets
Mhm.
for everybody, and I have my essential oils going
There
of
we
our
go.
oils and whatnot. Yeah, so
Oh my God, that's
de-
great.
definitely that. And really the my biggest thing there are the pollinators, the bees. Like that's really where my
Mm,
attention goes. And so
to the bees.
we have, yeah, we get thousands, millions of bees from all over the county, because 9.5 acres are coming in.
Yeah.
We have 3 hives currently there that I I also do the beekeeping there.
Okay.
And then and getting milkweed growing, and it looks like it's taking now. There's some eggs for monarch butterflies, and hopefully I'll have a
Oh,
monarch
wow.
butterfly sanctuary there as well too. Yeah.
Well, look at you. See, I always find something like that you never would imagine.
Yeah.
Hey, look, this Eric guy, he's a beekeeper. He's a lavender farmer. He's
This and that.
doing all,
Yeah.
yeah. See, I love that. Um, so did you always want to be a teacher? Or is that kind of something you just like fell into?
So I actually, growing up, I was always really good in math and science. Like I was totally a math and science guy. It came so naturally to me. Writing and reading, actually, I was always put in the remedial courses.
Mm,
Yeah, interesting how things work, right? And
yeah.
so, definitely thought I was going to go into engineering. Was accepted to an engineering program in at UT Austin, the aerospace engineering, actually. And I remember when I got to UT Austin, um, I was I was like, yeah, I'd be good at this, but I want to teach biblical studies like that. It's often like I tell people, I didn't choose it; it chose me.
Mm,
Um, and so when I walked up to the desk to transfer from aerospace to liberal arts, I remember stopping right before entering. I remember like it was yesterday, thinking, "This is a defining moment in my life. This is one of those crossroads." And I'm like, "I'm taking this path." And I didn't even question it. And I walked up and I'm like, "I would like to transfer from aerospace to liberal arts." And they thought I was saying liberal arts to aerospace, and they're like, this is a very hard degree to get into. It's gonna take more than, and you have to go to aerospace. And I'm like, oh, aerospace told me if I was transferring to liberal arts, I had to come here. And they're like, oh, you want to transfer from aerospace to liberal arts? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, are you sure you want to do this? I remember her asking me that as well too. And I'm like, yes, let's do it. And
wow.
so um, there's something about standing in front of a classroom I can't describe, but
Mm,
it's definitely what I'm made for teaching.
uh,
Yeah, it
mm,
there's no I mean there's no other way of putting it. There's zero ambiguity there. There's zero question that I've made to stand in front of a
mm,
classroom and teach. And so, after getting my bachelor's, I went and I taught high school. At St. Michael's High School in Santa Fe, New Mexico, La Salle School. It was the best years. It was a great place to learn how to become a teacher,
mm,
um, how to live in a community as a teacher, and it was just fantastic. A great school. Did my master's, and then after my master's, I taught another year at a high school in Austin, Texas. um, and that was a little bit more challenging. I won't say the school because I had a
mm,
little bit more of a hard time there. Um, but always, trying to find teaching jobs. During my master's, I actually taught for a program out there and was able to teach sort of more as like a community service thing. More than anything else, taught the book of Genesis. I remember to a sort of, it was like this just group of people at a congregation, Catholic congregation in New Britain, Connecticut. And that was a great experience as well too. So yeah, definitely had some good experiences. And then also after my master's too, I was able to find a job, luckily at Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee, and I taught a few years there. That was also a fantastic, eye-opening experience for me, teaching at that HBCU where
mm,
learning different perspectives in a very practical and in a way that was like, just okay, there it is, do it, and it was fantastic. Loved the students. It was such a great experience with the students there at Lane College.
mm.
Still
So great.
friends with some of them. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so how long have you been at Berkeley now?
So I've been here since 2015 when I started my PhD, and
Oh,
yeah, been here ever since. And it's almost
yeah.
10 years. It
Wow.
flew by.
Wow. I think that is a great sign though when it's flown by, it's not been like, "Oh my god, I've been here for 10 years."
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
kind of thing. Yeah, yeah. And you light up when you talk about it. So
Yes,
it's
thank you
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So as we wrap this up, the joy question. So
Uh-huh.
all those things that you do in your life, um, what brings you joy?
So, just hope it's okay. It's a three-part answer with
You
that.
the rule is you answer it however you wish. So,
So,
yes.
of course, family and friends, they of course bring a certain, family is a complicated thing, of
Yeah,
course, but
isn't it? Yeah.
definitely, maybe not happiness all the time, but joy definitely is.
Yeah.
My dogs, from a personal, my dogs are my absolute joy. I love them to death, and they are my world. Professionally, being in front of a classroom definitely is the absolute joy of my life is being in front of a
Mhm.
classroom. Um, and from the more open-ended perspective is I remember about a year or so back, a student asked me, "What's your moral compass then?" Because we were discussing the whole God thing,
No, yeah.
and it wasn't a question I really ever um, thought about the answer to, and I sat down and I thought, like, what is it really? Because my views on God as the sort of moral shaper of our I don't think God works in our views of morality like we do here on earth. That there's something bigger going on with that. I don't want to get into theology. It's not really my thing and whatnot. But I thought, what is my moral compass? And after reflecting, I thought, it's the idea that the strong should protect the weak,
Mm,
that we should honor and respect all living creatures from the smallest things to up until the planet itself and protect that. And when I see individuals um that sort of get or follow that similar path, it not only gives me joy, but it gives me hope. And I'm not the most hopeful person and joyful person. Many times I'm somewhat antisocial actually. The only time I'm gregarious and I come out is in front of a classroom, right? Or when I'm
mhm,
talking about something that I enjoy. But other than that, I'm pretty quiet. But when I see that in action, when I see the powerful fighting for a good, a sense of something greater than them,
mm,
in the sense of protecting those that need protection. I find that to be the most hopeful and joyful thing that I think, and that's why part of my work that I didn't mention that I
mm.
would like to now is because
Sure.
I worked on Paul and culture in the Bible, but then I thought, who's going to read this book that I write? Don't get me wrong. I'm really happy about it. I'm like ecstatic actually, but it's going to go into the academic circle and it's going to
Mm,
be discussed by academics, right? I also thought though, I really want to do something not only that's going to be a little bit controversial, a little bit paradigm shaking, hopefully within the academic world, but what else can I do in the everyday world with what I have learned? What can I use this power, let's say, where it actually is going to change people's lives?
mm,
And another big interest I've had then in dealing then with Bible and culture is Bible and popular culture, particularly conspiracy theories. So
mm,
now part of my work is working with and with how are conspiracy theories used as a hermeneutic? How are they shaping biblical interpretation? And how can I get people out of that? How can I offer a different narrative? And it's very frustrating because in academia refuses to deal to the most part with popular culture. It's like the
mm,
dichotomies once again. And in this article I just published with the RNE, with the Review and Expositor, they I mentioned um, biblical scholars need to engage this because this other voice, this dangerous voice, is winning the shouting contest. They
mm,
have the microphone, and us as scholars who are well studied, well trained in biblical hermeneutics, we need to come in and put a stop to it and offer everyday individuals who are just hearing this nonstop biblical hermeneutic, this dangerous biblical hermeneutic that you find in conspiracy theories. They need a well-informed different voice that comes in
mm,
and offers an alternative. And so that is, I found, this is where I need to take my education, that which I have been privileged to have and to get. This is where I need to take it now and make a difference in some way, or yeah, and and close those dichotomies
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
much as I can. That's where I light up. That's joy for me for sure.
Mm. And so all of this will be in the book as well?
Not in the Paul book, but
Okay.
definitely a lot down the line. Hopefully,
Another book.
when I finish, it'll be a book on the Bible and conspiracy theories, and sort of offering an alternative. Yeah.
I think that'll be really interesting as well. I mean,
Thank you.
I love myself a good conspiracy theory. So, I mean, yeah,
Everybody does.
right? So yeah, I'd be really interested to read about biblical conspiracy
And
theories.
what's great about BST or Berkeley School of Theology is how much they have embraced and welcomed that work in me, because we're all about, and I want to make sure this goes out about Berkeley School of Theology, is we are about decolonizing theological education. We want to decolonize. We want to open that up into new avenues and new perspectives, and so we're a lot of work is being done at our seminary in that particular aspect of.
Well, I'm so glad that you shared
Thank you.
all of this. And those who are watching, those who are listening, if you're interested in learning more about Berkeley School of Theology and even Dr. Eric Sias' program, the degree completion. I don't know. No, it's not degree completion. The certificate program. We will. I will put the website in the show notes for you, so you'll know where to go and look. And we look forward to having you back and talking about Paul books, and then write that conspiracy book and come back and talk about that one too. Because why not? I mean, reading it's what I mean. Occupational hazard. We read so much,
Yes.
and I think it that we need to read more, and but it's also important what we're reading. So
Yes.
so I thank you so much for your time, for being a part of this, and
Thank you.
look forward to having you back and talking about all the great things that you're doing, your next projects.
All right. Thank you so
All right,
much.
thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank